Let me tell you about Jesus, so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Now the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, what charges are you bringing against this man? And they replied, if he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you. And Pilate said, take him yourselves and judge him by your own laws. They objected to this, saying, we have no right to execute anyone. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace and summoned Jesus and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus asked in return, is that your own idea, or did others talk to you about me? Pilate replied, am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done? And Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. And Pilate said, you are a king then? And Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Pilate responded to this question by saying, what is truth? With this he went out again to the Jews that were gathered there and said, I find no basis for charges against him, but it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at this time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? And they shouted back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went to him again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they slapped him in his face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, here is the man. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, crucify, crucify. But Pilate answered, you take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jewish leaders insisted, we have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. He asked Jesus, where do you come from? But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate asked him again, do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize I have power either to free you or crucify you? Jesus answered, you have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore the one who is handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. Then Pilate heard this. He brought Jesus out and sat him down on the judge's seat at the place known as the Stone Pavement. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. Pilate said to the Jews, here is your king. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him. Pilate asked, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin and Greek. The chief priest of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews," but this man claimed to be King of the Jews. But Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with their undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. They said to one another, "Let's not tear it. Let's decide by lot who will get it." And this happened that what is written in Psalm 22 might be fulfilled, that says, "They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments." So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, and they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. Because of this, the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies to be left on the crosses during the Sabbath, so that they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who was crucified with Jesus, and then of the other. But when they came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead. They did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows what he tells is the truth, and he testifies that you may also have believed. These things have happened so that Psalm 34 verse 20 would be fulfilled, that says, "Not one bone of his body was broken," and also Zechariah 12 and verse 10, which says, "They will look on the one they have pierced." Later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jewish leaders. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. And Nicodemus bought a mixture of myrrh and oils, about 75 pounds, and taking Jesus' body, and 2 of them wrapped his body in spices and strips of linen. It was in accordance with the Jewish burial customs. And at the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there.